Today we're taking a look at the RTX 4060 8GB GPU and the Final Fantasy XIV Dawntrail benchmark. As most of us know by now, this benchmark is a little bit harder on the systems than the older Endwalker version, but Final Fantasy XIV still remains a very playable game, even on modest hardware or older hardware. I'll be benchmarking 1080p, 1440p, and 4K resolutions. I'll even toss in some DLSS runs as well. One thing to note is that by default, the benchmark does default to enabling some kind of upscaling technology when the frames go below 60. So when you're looking at all of the benchmarks, you will see custom in the bottom left-hand corner. Unless I'm doing DLSS testing, you'll see FSR listed as the upscaling, but it will say custom because I've disabled FSR under all conditions. So we're only testing native quality unless I'm actually talking about DLSS. And when I am talking about DLSS, it'll always be enabled. In terms of the system specs here, we're using a Ryzen 7700X CPU, a Be Quiet Pure Loop 2 360mm all-in-one water cooler, the AsRock X670E PG Lightning motherboard, 32GB of G.Skill DDR5 6000 MB transfer memory, the Gigabyte RTX 4068GB of course. It's all powered by the Be Quiet Straight Power 1000 watt PSU, and it's all running inside of the Be Quiet Shadowbase 800FX case. We can see I've already started the runs for the 1080p desktop quality standard, the desktop high, and the maximum quality benchmark runs. This new Dawntrail benchmark has a couple of specific graphics tests contained within it, meant to test different aspects of your gaming PC. In terms of the 1080p benchmark, it's basically no issue. Even from the lowest quality all the way up to maximum quality, the RTX 4060 is definitely going to be able to handle that. I think 1080p might still be the most common screen resolution for gamers, so it's good to see we can really crank up that graphics quality and we don't have to suffer in terms of frame rate. The 1080p desktop preset averaged about 25,900 points across my benchmark test runs. The desktop high preset averaged just under 18,500 points across the runs, and the maximum quality preset averaged just about 16,400 points. Overall, I would say this is a pretty solid showing from a mid-range 2024 GPU. So now let's take a look at bumping that screen resolution up to 1440p. 1440p is really where I think the sweet spot is for this GPU and most gamers. Most gamers are going to have something like a 2560 by 1440p, maybe 100 or 144 Hz refresh rate gaming monitor. For the 1440p tests, I'll be running pretty much everything in native quality. The 1440p desktop standard benchmark runs were pretty much always above 100 FPS on average, so that's pretty nice to see. The average score for the desktop standard preset at 1440p was right around 17,850 points, which I would say is extremely playable, and you're even going to have good frame rates for high refresh rate monitors. As for the 1440p desktop high preset, I would definitely say this is still a solid frame rate experience. The graphics are a little bit increased, so we are going to dip below that magic 60 FPS number down into the mid-50s during the hardest of the benchmark tests. I personally don't see that as being a problem, dipping below 60 every once in a while depending on what's in screen, especially if it's only in the 50 FPS range. I would definitely say that the quality at desktop high is worth it. So if you really want to get above 60 FPS, even in those tough situations, you might want to take a look at overclocking your GPU, something like MSI Afterburner. I think you can squeak out another 3 to maybe 7 FPS on average if you overclock the core and the memory. If you don't want to overclock though, well, you pretty much want to turn on DLSS. I would either turn it on for below 60 FPS, which is usually the default in the benchmark, or keep it always on. Between my 1440p benchmark runs, the system averaged 12,100 points at the desktop high preset. Like I said, this is super playable, and I might choose this one if I had a 1440p monitor. As for the 1440p max testing, I did actually test this on my test bench, but unfortunately I had an issue and I lost the footage. When I went to check in my backup folder, I didn't have it there either. From what I remember, the scores were a little bit below 10K on average, and we definitely saw the frame rates dip into the 40 FPS range here and there. So if you do want to run 1440p max, I'm guessing you probably need to overclock and you probably want DLSS enabled. That being said, let's take a look at the 4K performance on the RTX 4060 8GB. This is where things are probably going to get interesting for a lot of people. While 4K is definitely less common than 1440p monitors, there's definitely a lot of people out there who want to play this game in 4K. You can definitely run this card without upscaling, but you're probably looking at either overclocking or upscaling or both for most of the 4K resolutions. As for the desktop preset standard, we were in pretty much the low 40 FPS range in some of the more intense scenes. We did see some frame time issues here and there, but it wasn't that bad. So I would say if you're opposed to upscaling and you don't want to overclock, you probably could get by with just playing 4K desktop standard quality on the RTX 4060. The desktop standard preset averaged about 8,200 points. It's okay, not bad, but it's not great. And switching up to the 4K desktop high preset, well, the quality is a little bit better, but the frame rate situation is not. We definitely have some poor frame times. The average FPS in the more intense battle scenes is now getting into the low 30 FPS range. I would have to say the 4K desktop high preset is basically just too much for this GPU without upscaling or overclocking. The system averaged about 6,100 points for the 4K high preset. I know you want to look at the DLSS testing, that'll be after we look at the 4K max though. For the 4K max preset, no upscaling, yeah, it's rough. We have huge frame time spikes, the average FPS in the most intense battle scenes are now dipping into the 20 FPS range. I just would not run 4K max on this card without upscaling and overclocking. For the 4K max tests, the system averaged about 5,200 points, which the benchmark says is standard, but to be honest, like I said, I wouldn't play this way. I would either enable DLSS and or overclock. Now that we took a look at the 4K native results, I'm going to go ahead and enable DLSS, and I'm going to set it to always on. So I'm very curious to see if this will get us to a very playable experience for the various 4K quality settings. In taking a look at the 4K desktop standard quality with DLSS always on, this is a pretty good experience. You could even play this on a high refresh rate monitor. No issues in any of the graphics tests, even the more intense fight scenes. The system averaged about 15,300 points in the desktop standard quality with DLSS enabled. This is a very solid experience. In looking at the 4K desktop high preset with DLSS always on again, this is still a pretty good experience. The frame rate on average is a little bit lower, yes, but we are still maintaining over 60 FPS in most of the intense scenes, and sometimes as high as 100 FPS in the less intense areas. The system averaged a score of about 12,000 points with the 4K high preset running with DLSS always enabled. I would say in general, this is pretty good performance for the RTX 4060. Finally though, let's take a look at the 4K max quality with DLSS always enabled. Well, I'm a little surprised. 4K maximum quality with DLSS always enabled is very doable. I would say this is pretty much a very playable experience. The frame rates did drop a little bit into the 50s for the harder fight scenes, but in general, the frame times weren't too distracting and the experience was pretty decent. I think that if you really wanted to try to hit that magic 60 FPS number, even in the most intense scenes though, you are going to need DLSS and overclocking. With how easy overclocking is with a program like MSI Afterburner, I don't think that's a huge deal, but it's up to you if you want to do that. I think that the small effort though is totally going to be worth it, especially if Final Fantasy XIV is your main game and you have an RTX 4060 and you want to play with 4K max quality. I'm really surprised that the RTX 4060 could do this. It's kind of a big ask for a card that has this kind of hardware spec in my opinion. Now, as for the quality of DLSS itself in this game, I don't think it's producing a better than native image quality image for the benchmark. I ran through this benchmark what seems like a bajillion times. I will say it's hard to pick out the specific details that were actually less good though. There's a whole lot of movement and a lot of fast movement in this benchmark. I think during real gameplay, it is possible you could notice some quality issues just because it might not be quite as fast as the benchmark, but to be honest, I really don't think anyone's going to care that much. Even when I slow the videos down side by side and I look at DLSS and non-DLSS, the quality differences really don't bug me at all. I might be able to notice some shadows or maybe some issues in really fast movement scenes, but to be honest, while I'm playing or watching this, it's not going to be something that comes across my mind. I'm really hoping that since this benchmark dropped well in advance of the game, that the devs are still working on quality improvements and performance optimization. I know this is a super popular game, so a lot of people are going to be into this. Well, that's pretty much it for this one. So if you found this video helpful, I would really appreciate it if you smash that like button, since it took a huge amount of time for me to put this video together. That also helps let YouTube know that other people who want to research how the RTX 4060 performs in Final Fantasy XIV Dawntrail, that this video will be helpful for them too. I create gaming and home lab videos here, so if you're interested in that kind of thing, I would definitely recommend that you get subscribed to the channel and ring that bell for video upload notifications. I'll have links in the description to the build and a couple of other interesting things on Amazon, so definitely check that out. Until next time, keep on gaming.